He most of the time covered his face with either his fingers or a mask. In one of his most popular heists, he made away with more than £1.5 million. Dr. James Donovan was the target of the bomb he planted in 1982. He was also infamous for continuing to receive welfare despite leading an obviously opulent lifestyle made possible by criminal activities. He ordered Brian Purcell, an inspector with the Department of Social Welfare, to be kidnapped and shot in the legs. What kind of a man was he? Famously called the General. Was there anyone as notorious as him? And will there be any other? Many people believe that Martin Cahill, a Dublin crime lord who rose to fame during his lifetime as Ireland's most infamous criminal, is the most well-known Irish criminal of all time. His adventures were the focus of a film, a television show, and a ton of books, and his life shed light on some troubling aspects of Irish culture in the 1980s. His stint in the Spike Island jail cells was just one chapter in a life saga that included thefts that garnered international attention. But his fate was not to be a blissful one. Martin Cahill was the second of 12 children and was born in a slum on the north side of Dublin in 1949. As soon as they arrived at school, he and his brother started stealing food to feed their family. He then advanced to armed robbery and housebreaking, and when he attempted to join the Navy, he was rejected because of his criminal history. He was rated as one of Dublin's most dangerous criminals because of his targeting of security vehicles carrying cash from one bank to another. The robbery of almost 2 million Irish punts, around 2.5 million euros today, in gold and diamonds from O'Connor's Jewellers in Harold's Cross in 1983, which he planned and executed, was what gained his first national notoriety. The well-organized theft garnered widespread media attention and signaled Cahill's advancement to high-value targets. He was free to organize the next crime since the Garda were unable to identify him for the first one, and his objective was much more lofty. In 1986, Cahill discovered valuable artworks at Rusborough House, a privately held historic estate in County Wicklow. 18 paintings were taken during the heist that he and his crew carried out, including Jan Vermeer's The Letter Writer, which is now one of the Irish National Gallery's most cherished holdings. Only 2 Vermeer's paintings were privately possessed at the time Cahill stole this one. The other was in Queen Elizabeth's collection in Britain. The collection, which also included pieces by Goya, 2 Rubens, 2 Metsus, and a Gainsborough, was estimated to be valued up to £100 million, making it the second largest art robbery in history. Due to the theft's fame, which garnered international attention, Cahill and his crew were unable to recoup their investment in the priceless paintings. Although some were found right away, many others remained lost in the Dublin mountains for many months or even years. The robbery turned out to be a bad idea, and all but 2 of the paintings, 2 gaudy created Venetian scenes that are now worth millions of dollars, were recovered. Only Martin Cahill is believed to know where they are, and they may still be hidden in the Dublin mountains. Following the incident, Cahill took on the authorities and gained a mystical stature in Irish culture. Some even saw him as a folk hero. He could be recognized by the fact that he was hiding his face with his hand, and the media gave him the term the General to prevent libel claims. However, Martin Cahill's status as Robin Hood was quickly fading. In a 1988 television special, he was identified as the perpetrator of the car explosion that left Ireland's top forensic scientist paralyzed, and quickly connected to the 1983 jewelry heist that cost 100 jobs. To conduct round-the-clock surveillance on Cahill and his crew, a special police task team known as the Tango Squad was established. With few acquaintances and an inability to function properly, he discovered himself to be a prisoner of his own making. The Ulster Volunteer Force, an adversary of the Irish Republican Army in Northern Ireland, was enraged by his attempts to sell the artworks he had stolen to them, turning him into a dangerous foe. More investigation followed after government ministers brought up Cahill's ownership of a sizable, opulent residence that was significantly larger than what his known salary could have supported. Eventually, in 1988, Cahill was sentenced to 4 months on Spike Island for breaching the peace. Following a strategy used against other well-known international criminals like Al Capone, the Irish police detained their target for any legal violations they could demonstrate. Cahill was transferred to Cork Harbour because it was deemed too hazardous for him to remain in Dublin prisons. This move made it harder for Cahill to put his gang together. As he was being transported to the island, his last words to the awaiting media on the pier in Cove were, "Que sera, sera." According to all accounts, Cahill was quiet and respectful when he was on the island, staying out of sight and not standing out. He was participating in periodic activities like attending classes and doing some simple work like painting, plastering, gardening, and other tasks. On August 18, 1994, after being freed on bail, Cahill departed the Swan Grove residence where he had been residing and started driving to a nearby store. He was repeatedly shot in the face and upper torso at the intersection of Oxford Road and Charleston Road, and he died nearly instantaneously. The shooter, who was carrying a .357 Magnum pistol, mounted a motorcycle and rode away. Numerous theories exist on who murdered Martin Cahill and why. The Provisional Irish Republican Army, IRA, issued a press release in the hours following Cahill's passing to take credit. Cahill suspected participation with an Ulster Volunteer Force UVF unit in Portadown was given as the justification. According to rumours, John Gilligan and John Traynor, two of Cahill's lieutenants, built a sizable hashish trafficking operation while giving the IRA and INLA protection money. The Garda think that Traynor and Gilligan went to the IRA and accused Cahill of smuggling heroin, a narcotic that the IRA loathed and was trying to stop from being peddled in Dublin. Although he is remembered today as a vicious and dangerous man who committed several crimes that changed people's lives, some of his deaths also stand out for their audacity and ambition. He continues to be one of Ireland's most enigmatic characters from the 20th century, and the 2000 movie Ordinary Decent Criminal starring Kevin Spacey and Colin Farrell was loosely based on his life. The General, which John Boorman directed, won Best Director at the Cannes Film Festival. The original cells where Martin Cahill was detained in the 1980s are still visible to visitors to Spike Island today. Martin the General chose a life of crime, violence, and social disruption. He made decisions that had grave consequences, and it ended very sad with him losing everything, plus his life. On July 27, 1983, Martin the General Cahill's gang executed a well-orchestrated plan to infiltrate O'Connor's jewellery factory in Harold's Cross, Dublin. They identified a vulnerability in the factory's security, a boiler room not connected to the alarm system, and used it as an entry point. The gang hid there overnight, awaiting the arrival of key staff members the next morning. When the factory manager Bobby arrived to open the premises, the gang ambushed him, forcing him at gunpoint to disable the alarm and grant access to the safes. The robbers employed military-style tactics, utilizing smoke bombs, walkie-talkies, vans, and motorbikes to facilitate their escape. The haul amounted to £2 million in gold and diamonds. The financial ramifications of the robbery were devastating for O'Connor's jewellery factory. Despite having insurance coverage of £900,000, the company could not recover from the loss and was ultimately forced into bankruptcy. This led to the loss of over 100 jobs, marking a significant blow to the local economy and community. 3 years later, the gang struck again. On May 21, 1986, while Sir Alfred and Lady Bayard were away, Cahill led a 13-member gang in a meticulously planned raid on Rusborough House. The gang infiltrated the mansion under the cover of darkness and removed 18 paintings from the wall, including works by renowned artists such as Vermeer, Goya, Rubens, Gainsborough, and Metsu. Notably, Vermeer's Lady Writing a Letter with Her Maid was among the stolen pieces. The thieves used multiple vehicles to transport the artworks, setting off the security alarm at 2 a.m. However, an initial police check found nothing amiss, and the theft was only discovered later that morning when the caretaker noticed the missing paintings. Valued at around £30 million, the stolen masterpieces made this one of the most daring and momentous art heists in Irish history, an audacious strike that stunned the nation and rocked the art world. The high-profile nature of the stolen artworks made them extremely difficult to sell on the open market. Within hours of the theft, 7 paintings were recovered from a truck abandoned in the nearby village of Manakil Bride. Over the ensuing years, the remaining pieces surfaced in various locations, often linked to international criminal activities. Some were found in London and Belgium, while others appeared in Turkey, where they had been used as collateral in drug deals. Nothing in his early life hinted at the criminal empire he would one day help build. Born on February 2, 1948, just off Charmont Street near Dublin's South Inner City, John Traynor came from a respectable, comfortable home. His parents were decent, relatively well off, and he and his 7 siblings never went without. But everything changed when the family moved to Cloher Road in Crumlin. Traynor was just 10 and suddenly surrounded by kids with very different ambitions. These weren't boys dreaming of trades or college. They idolized gangsters and saw crime as a fast track to money and respect. By 13, Traynor had earned his first conviction, housebreaking. A month later, he was behind bars, tasting prison for the first time. Over the next 5 years, he racked up multiple convictions and spent 9 months in jail for larceny, robbery, and burglary. Desperate to straighten him out, his horrified father pulled him from the streets and sent him to sea at age 15, signing him up with Irish Shipping and the B&I Line. It was a last-ditch effort to rescue a son already slipping beneath the surface of Dublin's criminal underworld. However, the move turned out completely different than his father had hoped. It was meant to set him straight, but the sea would steer John Traynor deeper into darkness. Instead of reform, he found John Gilligan. Their meeting, seemingly incidental, would become a turning point with devastating consequences for Ireland years later. The two struck up a friendship that would evolve into a dangerous and enduring criminal partnership. Back on dry land, Traynor tried on the mask of a family man. In 1973, he married Michelle Sexton, a naive country girl who had no idea what she was walking into. They settled in Temple Oak, South Dublin, and raised 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, between 1974 and 1985. But behind closed doors, the mask slipped. Traynor was a chronic womanizer with a taste for drink, gambling, and fast money. Michelle endured a husband who was rarely home because he was either with another woman or behind bars. In December 1977, Traynor was sentenced to 5 years for possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life. Just days later, he was hit with another 5-year stretch, this time for assault, burglary, larceny, and common assault. Luckily for him, the sentences ran concurrently. Unluckily for everyone else, prison didn't reform him, it refined him. By the time he was out, Traynor was a polished conman and trusted middleman in Dublin's underworld. He forged counterfeit checks and bank drafts, moved stolen goods with ease, and laundered cash for the city's biggest gangs. He partnered with well-known criminals like Fran the Lamb Cunningham and Sean Fixer Fitzgerald, the latter becoming his closest ally. In the 1980s, he gravitated toward Martin the General Cahill, the calculating mastermind behind some of Ireland's most infamous heists. The two men, so different in style, clicked. Cahill was silent, shadowy, and controlled. Traynor was loud, flashy, and reckless, but he proved invaluable to the General, acting as his consigliere and public face. The pair even went in on a pub together. Traynor, who came from a more comfortable background and was involved in the pub trade and dog racing circles, was drawn to the allure of the criminal lifestyle. Then, in late 1982, Traynor came to Cahill with a bold idea, a plan to rob O'Connor's jewelry factory in Harold's Cross. He had an inside man feeding him details about alarms, layouts, and security blind spots. In July 1983, the plan came to life. Cahill, Traynor, Martin the Viper Foley, and a group of 8 pulled off one of the most audacious robberies in Irish history, escaping with gold and jewels worth £2 million. It was a heist that would redefine their legend and begin their spiral into violence, paranoia, and betrayal. The heist sealed Traynor's status as a criminal mastermind and catapulted Cahill to the top of Ireland's underworld. But their success came at a price. It put them squarely in the crosshairs of the IRA, setting the stage for a deadly confrontation. In 1992, Traynor's criminal ambitions caught up with him when he was arrested and convicted in the UK for his role in one of the most audacious financial crimes in history, the infamous City Bonds robbery. On May 2nd, what appeared to be a routine mugging of a courier in London quickly unraveled into a staggering £291.9 million heist, worth nearly £840 million today. But this was no street-level crime. It was a meticulously orchestrated operation that spanned continents, roping in the New York Mafia, Colombian drug lords, and even the provisional IRA. The sheer scale and sophistication of the fraud made it one of the biggest robberies the world has ever seen, and Traynor was right at the heart of it. After the robbery, Traynor collaborated with associates James Danger Byrne and Francis Conlon to launder the stolen bonds. They attempted to use some of the bonds as collateral to secure a £200,000 advance from a Swiss bank under the guise of funding a fictitious £100 million Caribbean resort. The bank grew suspicious and alerted authorities. When an associate returned to the bank to collect the remaining funds, he was told to wait. During this time, he contacted Traynor, who was nearby. Police arrested both men in a coordinated operation in London and Geneva. Traynor was charged with handling stolen goods and sentenced to 7 years in prison. In July 1990, he began serving his sentence at HM Prison High Point North in Suffolk. While behind bars, Traynor rubbed shoulders with some of the biggest names in the drug trade, and he took notes. In November 1992, he was granted temporary home leave to visit his family in Dublin. Instead of returning, Traynor fled and remained at large for 18 years. By the time he got out, he'd reinvented himself as a second-hand car dealer, but the coach, as he was known on the streets, had far bigger ambitions. He wanted into the drug game, and he knew exactly who to team up with: his old partner in crime, John Gilligan. The duo secured a £150,000 cash loan from Martin the General Cahill to get started, and soon their operation was in full swing. Truckloads of hash were being smuggled through Dublin Port, and by the summer of 1994, they'd brought in over 1,000 kilos, raking in nearly £900,000 in profit. Gilligan and Traynor were the brains behind the operation, pulling strings, managing the cash, and sealing the big drug deals. On the ground, it was Peter Fatso Mitchell, Gilligan's right-hand man, and Brian the Tosser Meehan, a rising thug with a growing reputation, who got their hands dirty. They were the muscle, the enforcers who made sure the money kept rolling in and the streets stayed in line. But at one point, Cahill came knocking, not just demanding his original investment back, but an extra £350,000 and a cut of all future earnings. Traynor, never one to be strong-armed, allegedly took a darker path. Whispers on the street claimed he'd reached out to his contacts in the IRA and INLA, groups he'd long courted and helped orchestrate Cahill's murder. In August 1994, Cahill was executed in broad daylight in Ranelagh. The debt was buried with him, but Traynor's ruthlessness didn't stop there. In February 1996, he told Gilligan that Martin the Viper Foley had tipped off the IRA about their heroin dealing. The enforcer, Brian Meehan, who'd already been questioned by the IRA, was sent to take the Viper out. He failed, only managing to shoot Foley in the back and finger. After Martin Cahill was gunned down by the IRA in 1994, a power vacuum gripped Dublin's underworld. Into that void stepped John Gilligan, rapidly expanding his drug empire and seizing control of the streets. Rumblings of rivalry soon surfaced, whispers of tension between the remnants of Cahill's crew and Gilligan's rising syndicate, each vying for dominance in a city suddenly up for grabs. All the while, Traynor played a dangerous double game, feeding information to Gardaí about rival criminals, buying himself protection while he continued his own shady dealings unchecked. In addition, he provided journalists with stories and was the main underworld source of the Sunday Independent's Veronica Guerin. She nicknamed him the Coach, and he expertly spun stories against friends and enemies alike, including Cahill, Foley, Jerry the Monk Hutch, and Gilligan. However, he later sought a High Court injunction to prevent her from publishing stories about his involvement in the drug trade. Veronica Guerin's fearless reporting shook the foundations of Ireland's criminal underworld. In January 1995, her investigations nearly cost her life. She was shot in the leg at her home by a masked gunman. Gardaí suspected John Traynor, who was under intense pressure amid rumours that he was leaking information to the journalist. By August 1995, Guerin had zeroed in on John Gilligan. The drug boss, enraged by the spotlight, responded with brutal violence, savagely assaulting Guerin and threatening to murder her young son. Despite the danger, Guerin continued speaking to Traynor, unaware she was placing her trust in the wrong man. During one of their final conversations, she casually mentioned she'd be in Naas District Court on June 26, 1996, over a minor speeding charge. That single detail sealed her fate. Traynor knew Gilligan wanted her silenced. The next day, as Guerin waited at traffic lights on the Naas dual carriageway, she was gunned down in cold blood by Eugene Dutchy Holland on Gilligan's orders. Following Guerin's murder, Traynor fled Ireland. Though he publicly denied any involvement, Gardaí believed he had tipped off Gilligan's gang about Guerin's whereabouts on the day she was killed. He was never formally charged, but investigators were convinced he had played a key role, feeding crucial information that led to her assassination. Years later, in a shocking courtroom twist, John Gilligan claimed it was Traynor who ordered the hit on Guerin behind his back. Despite the gravity of the accusations, Traynor was never extradited to face justice in Ireland. The evidence, authorities admitted, just wasn't strong enough to hold up in court. Traynor eventually settled in Amsterdam, where he ran a bar called The Hungry Goat alongside his longtime lover of over 20 years, Sharon Kinahan. But despite the change in scenery, he never left his old ways behind. Dutch police suspected he remained deeply entrenched in organised crime, allegedly orchestrating cannabis shipments back to Ireland and providing safe haven for Irish gangland figures on the run. Even in exile, the coach was never far from the shadows of the underworld. However, justice finally caught up with John Traynor in 2010 when Dutch police arrested him in Amstelveen, a quiet suburb of Amsterdam. He was carrying a driver's license belonging to a known Dutch drug trafficker, and a raid on his apartment uncovered yet another shock. He'd been living with fellow fugitive Peter Fatso Mitchell, a key player in the Gilligan gang. The arrest came after a coordinated operation between the UK's Serious Organised Crime Agency and Dutch regional police. Traynor had been on the run for years, drifting between Spain, Belgium, and the Netherlands, using false identities and staying one step ahead of the law. Following his arrest, Traynor refused to appear in court, citing serious heart issues. But his medical pleas didn't sway the Dutch authorities. His extradition to the UK was approved. He was sent back to serve the remainder of a 7-year sentence handed down in 1992 for handling the stolen bearer bonds. Incarcerated at the medium-security High Point prison in Suffolk, Traynor's health continued to decline. He suffered multiple heart attacks behind bars and underwent triple bypass surgery. He was released in September 2012 and quietly relocated to a seaside town in Kent with Sharon. Living in near seclusion, Traynor remained deeply paranoid, haunted by the fear that investigative journalists would unmask his new life, or worse, that Gardaí might one day come knocking to extradite him over the murder of Veronica Guerin. He would eventually die from cancer in 2021 at the age of 73. On June 26, 1996, 36-year-old Veronica Guerin, known as Ronnie to those closest to her, pulled up to a traffic light near Clondalkin, Dublin, in her red Opel. In an instant, disaster struck. 6 years earlier, Veronica had pivoted from a career in accountancy and politics to investigative journalism, driven by an insatiable hunger for the truth. By 1992, she had plunged into Ireland's criminal underworld, exposing its darkest corners with fearless reporting. She wasn't content with second-hand accounts. She went straight to the source, often brushing shoulders with the very criminals she was investigating. Her relentless pursuit of the truth came at a steep cost. As she uncovered the dealings of Dublin's most notorious drug lords, the threats escalated. In October 1994, bullets tore through her home after she published a story on murdered crime boss Martin Cahill. The intimidation didn't stop there. The day after writing about Jerry the Monk Hutch, she was shot in the leg after answering her door. But Veronica refused to back down. She made a vow to continue, no matter the danger. A vow that ultimately would lead to her tragic fate. Peter Fatso Mitchell is one of Ireland's most infamous gangland figures, a key player in John Gilligan's drug empire, and the man who convinced Gilligan to enter the narcotics trade in the mid-1990s. Before long, Fatso became Gilligan's trusted lieutenant, helping to build Ireland's first multi-million-euro drug operation. At the height of the ecstasy boom, he was a major supplier, flooding the streets with pills and cashing in on the rave culture. Mitchell grew up in Dublin's tough north inner city, a Summerhill kid who started out dealing cannabis and ecstasy. During this time, another soon-to-be notorious gangster, Brian the Tosser Meehan, was behind bars. When Fatso visited him in prison, he boasted about the money pouring in and promised Meehan a slice of the action once he was released. Meehan, in turn, was sharing a prison yard with John Gilligan, a career criminal looking for his next big move. Gilligan had the connections, especially through his associate John Traynor, and soon, the four of them had set up a ruthless and highly profitable drug empire. Gilligan and Traynor were the masterminds, handling the finances and major deals, while Fatso and Tosser were the foot soldiers, the ones making things happen on the streets. Between 1994 and 1996, the gang raked in a staggering €20 million, living large and partying hard. They were on top of the world, until Gilligan made a fatal mistake. He set his sights on journalist Veronica Guerin, and from that moment, everything began to unravel. In 1995, when Veronica Guerin confronted him about his lavish lifestyle, despite having no legitimate income, he lashed out, attacking her on the spot. But the violence didn't stop there. Later he called her at home, delivering a chilling threat. He would kidnap and rape her soon before killing her if she dared write about him. But Guerin was fearless. On the eve of that fateful day in June 1996, Mitchell, Brian Meehan, and a handful of Gilligan's top men gathered at their distribution hub in the Green Man Industrial Estate. There, they branded a Colt Python revolver, a weapon that would change Irish history forever. The next afternoon, Veronica Guerin was behind the wheel of her red Opel Calibra and stopped at a red light on the outskirts of Dublin. She had no idea she was being hunted. A motorcycle carrying two men pulled up beside her. In a flash, a gunman raised the revolver and fired. 6 shots at point-blank range. She had no chance. The assassin sped off, leaving her slumped in the driver's seat, lifeless. The murder sent shockwaves around Ireland. It triggered the country's largest ever criminal investigation, leading to over 150 arrests and a brutal crackdown on organised crime. The government acted swiftly. Within a week, the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Criminal Assets Bureau Act was passed, giving authorities unprecedented power to seize assets bought with dirty money. From the ashes of Guerin's assassination, the Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, was born, a relentless force in the war against Ireland's drug lords. Her death was meant to silence the truth. Instead, it ignited a revolution. In the aftermath of Veronica Guerin's murder, the Irish state came down on the Gilligan gang with unprecedented force. It was the beginning of the end. Key members scattered, fleeing to the UK and mainland Europe, Peter Fatso Mitchell among them. With the newly formed Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, on the hunt, no property, cash, or asset tied to crime was safe anymore. Despite authorities linking Mitchell to the gang's distribution hub in Green Man Industrial Estate, his fingerprint found at the scene, there was never enough evidence to pin him directly to Guerin's murder. He slipped through their fingers, but he wasn't done. Mitchell resurfaced on the Costa del Sol, diving headfirst into the booming cocaine trade. From a luxury villa in Puerto Banús, he carved out a place for himself as a major international drug supplier, rubbing shoulders with some of the most dangerous criminals in Europe. Many were UK-based kingpins, while others had deep ties to Ireland. He worked closely with George the Penguin Mitchell and kept in regular contact with John the Coach Traynor, who moved between the Netherlands and Margate on England's south coast. On the Costa, Mitchell was a heavyweight player. His influence became clear when he purchased Paparazzi, a bar just outside Puerto Banús. It quickly became a notorious meeting spot for drug gangs, including the Kinahans, back when they were still on the rise. Fat Freddie Thompson and his cousins Liam and David Byrne were regulars, often accompanied by their father James Jaws Byrne. Mitchell had escaped Ireland's crackdown, but in Spain, he was thriving in an underworld that was only getting bigger, richer, and deadlier. Around that time, Christy Kinahan Sr. had sent his sons to the Costa del Sol too, to expand their empire. But Christy wanted nothing to do with Mitchell, just as he'd kept his distance from John Gilligan. To him, men like Fatso were toxic, magnets for garner attention with their reckless violence. By then it was 2008. Fatso had already spent a decade cementing his position. He was confident, in peak shape, and living the high life in a lavish villa. While most of the old Gilligan gang were either dead or rotting in prison, Mitchell was thriving, arguably better than ever. He still maintained strong ties to Dublin's North Inner City, especially with childhood friends like Paddy Doyle. Doyle, a hitman for Fat Freddie Thompson during the brutal Crumlin Drimnagh feud, had fled to Spain when the Gardaí closed in. Settling on the Costa, he moved between Fatso's operation and the rising Kinahan cartel until the cartel decided he was a liability. At the time, Mitchell was the undisputed Irish king of the Costa del Sol. The Kinahans, by contrast, were still up-and-comers, just one of many groups vying for dominance. They hadn't yet established the fearsome reputation they had later wielded. Paddy Doyle, though, was a marked man. Despite hanging around with Kinahan associates, Gary Hutch and Freddie Thompson, eating at gym together and drinking at paparazzi, his reckless behaviour drew too much heat. He got involved in conflicts, made enemies, and in a world where power shifts swiftly, he became the first to be targeted. On February 4, 2008, Paddy Doyle sat in his black BMW SUV, Gary Hutch at the wheel, and Freddie Thompson in the back seat. They'd just left the apartment complex where Hutch and Thompson lived and headed toward the gym. Doyle had no idea he was being led straight into a trap. As they pulled up to a crossroads, another car crept alongside them. In an instant, 5 gunshots ripped through the passenger window. Doyle, wounded but still alive, stumbled out of the SUV trying to flee. He barely made it a few steps before he collapsed to his knees. Pleading for his life, he looked up, only to be executed with 2 bullets to the back of the head. At first, rumours swirled that Russian gangsters were behind the hit, but the truth was far more brutal. Doyle had been betrayed by his own, the Kinahan cartel, and the men who set him up, none other than Gary Hutch and Freddie Thompson, his supposed friends. It was a calculated setup from the start. They had to cut the electricity to his apartment, knowing he'd reach out, restless as ever, and suggest a trip to the gym. As expected, he called them, and they went to pick him up. But the moment they hit the road, the plan was already in motion. When the ambush came, it was Eric Lucky Wilson who pulled the trigger. Hutch and Thompson, of course, walked away unharmed, rewarded by Christy Kinahan's approval. 6 months later, it was Fatso's turn. He and 2 associates were sitting outside the El Jardín bar in the Aloha Gardens complex, near Puerto Banús, enjoying a few beers when a masked gunman struck. 4 shots rang out, 2 of them hitting Mitchell in the shoulder and arm. The other 2 men were also wounded, but all 3 survived. The hit came in the wake of a growing rift between Fatso and Christy Kinahan Sr. By all accounts, Kinahan had never liked Mitchell, seeing him as reckless and bad for business. His flashy lifestyle and lack of discretion brought too much heat to the Costa del Sol, and that wasn't something Kinahan could afford, especially not after his recent arrest in Belgium on money laundering charges. But questions lingered. Was Christy really behind the attempt on Fatso's life, or was someone else pulling the strings? By this time, Daniel Kinahan was making moves to take over the empire while his father was locked up. Fatso had built a powerful presence on the Costa, running his operations from a prime location, his HQ bar, a spot the Kinahans had their eyes on. At the time, they were still operating out of the Isle Dubliner, but if Daniel wanted to tighten his grip on the scene, removing Fatso was a logical step. Whether Christie sanctioned it or Daniel orchestrated it himself, one thing was clear. Fatso had just survived the deadly warning. After the failed hit, Fatso knew better than to take on the Kinahans head-on. He vanished, shutting down his paparazzi bar in Puerto Banús, a notorious hub for international gangsters, before slipping out of sight. Over time, he faded from the scene, almost becoming a forgotten figure. But he resurfaced in the Netherlands, reconnecting with his old associate John Traynor. Traynor had been living there since the fallout from Veronica Guerin's murder, but he was also a fugitive. He'd been on the run from UK authorities for 18 years, having escaped prison just 1 year into a 7-year sentence for handling stolen bearer bonds in London. In 2010, Traynor's luck ran out. He was arrested in Amstelveen, a quiet suburb on the outskirts of Amsterdam, where he'd been living under the radar. Mitchell had also spent time there, but after Traynor's capture, he once again disappeared into the shadows, until his own arrest in 2020. By July of that year, Fatso Mitchell had fallen from his peak. No longer the untouchable drug kingpin of the Costa del Sol, he was now physically moving drugs himself. His downfall came when police intercepted his car on the M4 near Bridgend as he travelled from Bradford to Swansea. Hidden among boxes of nappies in the back seat, officers found 3 kilos of cocaine worth over £133,000. His 2 UK-based associates, Nathan Webber and James Gallagher, were arrested shortly after. Their operation unravelled when Dutch and French law enforcement cracked EncroChat, an encrypted phone network favoured by criminals worldwide. Before the breach was discovered, investigators had already downloaded a goldmine of messages, which they shared with police across Europe, including in the UK. EncroChat intelligence exposed a massive cocaine trafficking ring, with Mitchell operating under the alias Gorilla Hawk, Webber as Cheeky Panda, and Gallagher as Diver Hawk. Their messages detailed drug shipments, prices per kilo, and delivery arrangements to addresses in Clydach, Morriston, and Port Talbot. One message even mentioned Colombian suppliers with 100 kilos of coke ready to go. Some of the packages smuggled into Swansea were branded with the Avengers logo, an underworld calling card. When Mitchell failed to show up at a scheduled drop-off, Webber and Gallagher began messaging each other in panic, suspecting he'd been arrested. And those messages were picked up after the EncroChat hack. After a 5-month period, their network trafficked an estimated 42 kilos of cocaine into Swansea, worth up to 2.1 million euros. Webber and Gallagher ran the Swansea end of the operation, with their own customer base and supply lines, but they also collaborated to secure the best deals. Their suppliers were based in England, with Mitchell acting as a key transporter, personally driving consignments from Bradford. As police closed in, financial seizures painted a picture of their profits. Officers discovered £25,000 in cash and £3,000 worth of silver bullion at Webber's own, while a search of Gallagher's attic uncovered a suitcase stuffed with £100,000. News of Fatso Mitchell's arrest was the first anyone heard of him in years, ever since he was forced to flee the Costa del Sol. For a long time, he remained the last unaccounted for member of the once feared Gilligan gang. By 2022, Mitchell, along with his co-conspirators Webber and Gallagher, pleaded guilty and were each sentenced to 10 years in prison, the heaviest sentence Mitchell had ever received, despite his decades in organised crime. While locked up, Mitchell kept his head down, but word of his past spread among fellow inmates. Some, curious about his history, even shared the film Veronica Guerin, a crime thriller based on a journalist whose murder brought down the Gilligan gang. Then, in October 2024, after serving just 4 years of his 10-year sentence, Mitchell was released from HMP Prescourt, an open prison in South Wales. His early release came as part of a new Labour government policy aimed at reducing overcrowding in British jails. Under the programme, only prisoners convicted of non-violent and non-sexual offences were eligible, with those who had served at least 40% of their sentence being freed. Now, the big question remains, will the veteran mobster return to the game, or has he already? With over 40 convictions, multiple gunshot wounds, countless attacks on his life, and a crime rap sheet that's longer than a 40-foot container, Martin Foley is one of the most dreaded Irish crime bosses of all time. Martin Foley, also known as the Viper, is an infamous Irish criminal who was born on the 24th of November 1952. From being a street drug dealer, the Viper advanced to becoming a close friend of Martin Cahill, also known as the General. However, the Viper has seen and done it all, from his early days of learning his trade on risky jewelry heists with the General, to his time as a significant drug importer, working with John Gilligan, with 18 bullet wounds to show for it. Foley is the true definition of what you might call a crime boss. Foley, who goes by the moniker the Viper, has been found guilty of more than 40 offences, including assault, robbery, and possession of dangerous weapons. Is there any crime in the books this guy is not guilty of? Being a notorious member of the Dublin gangland, Foley was convicted for the first time in 1968, and since that time, he's been a criminal gang member of Martin Cahill and has served time in prison for a variety of crimes, including fracturing a police officer's jaw. Reports have it that Foley attacked a Garda detective, leaving him with injuries from which he would never fully recover, according to Mick McCaffrey, the author of The Viper, The Life and Crimes of Martin Foley. He was sentenced to pay €738,449 in tax, interest, and penalties in 2020, after losing an appeal to the Supreme Court on a tax bill from the Criminal Assets Bureau. Foley had taken the matter to the Supreme Court, arguing that the CAB had put off seeking payment from him for years, and that the total amount owed dwarfed the initial verdict against him. The amount originally owed had more than tripled due to interest and penalties associated with the delinquent tax payment. As anyone would expect of a professional gangster, Foley has had numerous feuds with other gang leaders. Over the course of a career spanning more than 4 decades, he has run across the Provost frequently, making him the Rasputin of organized crime, in a manner of speaking. He is the criminal who has refused to be killed. Over these 4 decades of crime, you can count at least 5 times that Foley's life was in serious danger. In 1984, Foley was kidnapped by the IRA and hustled into a van. He was beaten before being released, following a gunfight between the Gardaí and paramilitary in Phoenix Park. He was shot in 1995 outside of Fatima Mansions, then in 1996 in an attack that was believed to be ordered by John Gilligan, and executed by convicted killer Brian Meehan in 2000, while he was leaving a swimming pool in Traynor, and lastly on the 26th of January 2008. The Kinahan cartel was responsible for that last botched hit, which took place on Christy Kinahan's orders in a row over €100,000. Foley was shot 4 times as he sat in a car outside a gym in Dublin. Foley's mob pal Fat Freddie Thompson was later identified as one of the organizers. Thompson's passport was found in the house of the suspected shooter. Despite the fact that Foley and Thompson were once close buddies, Thompson had to obey orders to put out the hit on Foley. Although Foley knew who was behind the hit, he still managed to stay on the cartel's good side. Foley first gained notoriety in the 1980s as a representative of a gang at odds with the Concerned Parents anti-drug movement, and as a member of the group led by murdered gangster Martin the General Cahill. Since the late 1980s, Foley has been the target of numerous criminal organizations looking to kill him. In September 2000, when Foley was leaving the Traynor College's swimming pool, the fitness enthusiast was shot in the leg. Before then, in 1999, the Garda stopped 2 potential assassins on a motorcycle in Walkinstown and prevented an IRA hit team from killing Foley. Martin the Viper Foley is now a criminal turned debt collector. He's been accused of threatening to kill a man in an alleged incident that took place in Wexford town. He threatened to slit his throat over a €4,000 debt. Foley and his co-accused Alan Nolte both pleaded guilty to the offence. Nolte had been working Viper Debt Recovery founded by Foley when he threatened a tenant that he would slit his throat while walking his dog if he didn't come up with the payment. However, Nolte denied having any intention to carry out the threats. The landlord had told a Garda that he had called the debt recovery agency run by Foley. On November 18, 2004, Foley founded Viper Debt Recovery. At that time, the company's records identified him as a sales rep. According to the company, their goal was to engage in the provision of debt recovery and repossession services, and to carry out all activities in relation to the aforementioned business. However, on the 17th of November 2014, Foley resigned his position as a director of the business. Sonia Foley, Foley's wife, later was named as a director of the company in October of 2018. Unfortunately, the Viper, Foley's first wife, passed away from cancer. Mrs. Foley supported her husband throughout his criminal career, several incarceration terms, and 5 assassination attempts. He was reportedly inconsolable by the death of his devoted wife. She was present when Brian Meehan, a gang rival who had to serve time in prison for his involvement in the murder of Veronica Guerin, an Irish organised crime investigative journalist, opened fire with a machine pistol inside their South Dublin home in 1996. Foley was struck in the back and hand, but he was able to get away from his assailant by scurrying around the outside of the house and eventually into a garden shed. Meehan, the shooter, fled after the machine gun jammed, but Foley eventually got vengeance for his attack. The attack happened while Mrs. Foley and her teenage daughter were seated in the living room of the family house on Cahill Avenue. She claimed Martin went round the house coming in the back door. He was running for his life. When he ran through, his hand was shot badly, but it was in my house that they shot him in the back. He had a hole in his back through his jumper. You could see he was shot. There was blood everywhere. He ran through and our instinct was to get out. Martin ran upstairs and through the whole house. Naturally, each room was covered in blood. We were running for our lives too. Whoever was outside didn't want to let us pass, so we were kind of caught as well. After the assault, Mrs. Foley sought counselling and went to victim support groups. But according to acquaintances, she never fully recovered from the experience. Additionally, The Criminal Assets Bureau's claim of a €600,000 tax bill to Foley put the couple's house in jeopardy. The house was open for his wife and the kids to stay though. Later, Foley went on to marry a 26-year younger woman named Sonia Doyle at a private ceremony in the Canary Islands in 2013. Martin Foley's life is filled with one certainty: violence. His lovely wife could not escape the impact of this terrible life of violence, and in the end, she lost everything. If you like this video and want more content like this, hit that like and subscribe button. Leave us a comment on what you think about this famous crime boss. Thank you for watching.